The biggest mistake powerful people make is assuming they know who matters. On a cold Thursday evening high above Manhattan, Dominic Caldwell sat at the most exclusive table in New York and prepared to close the biggest deal of his career. The Obsidian Room occupied the 45th floor of a glass tower overlooking the city skyline. It wasn't the kind of restaurant where people came for food. They came for influence. Billionaires came there to buy companies. Politicians came there to make promises. Investors came there to decide which industries would rise and which would fall. Dominic Caldwell belonged there. At 34, he was already worth billions. Financial magazines called him a genius. His competitors called him ruthless. Employees simply called him impossible to please. Tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was a merger worth nearly $3 billion. If the agreement went through, Dominic would gain control of one of Europe's largest shipping networks. If it failed, 6 months of negotiations would disappear overnight. Across the table sat his executive team. Lawyers reviewed documents. Advisors checked numbers. Everyone looked tense. Everyone except Dominic. He sat perfectly still, staring at the encrypted phone lying beside his plate. The final confirmation call from Italy was expected any minute. Meanwhile, Edith Stevens was trying not to think about overdue bills. She moved quietly through the dining room, carrying a tray of sparkling water. Her black uniform was spotless. Her posture was perfect. Her smile was professional. Years of working service jobs had taught her how to become invisible. Most customers never remembered her name. That was fine with her. She had bigger problems than being noticed. Her younger sister's university tuition was overdue. Her mother's assisted living payments were late again. And Edith was working double shifts just to keep everything from falling apart. Table 4, her manager whispered sharply. Move faster. Edith nodded and approached the billionaire's table. She recognized Dominic Caldwell immediately. Everyone in New York knew who he was. She also knew people like him rarely noticed people. Like her. She carefully poured sparkling water into crystal glasses. As she worked, the encrypted phone suddenly vibrated. The entire table froze. Dominic immediately picked it up. Put it on speaker, he ordered. One of his executives complied. A voice exploded through the device. Fast. Angry. Emotional. The language wasn't English. Several executives exchanged worried looks. The man speaking sounded frustrated. Dominic's chief advisor tried responding, but the conversation only became more chaotic. What is he saying? Dominic demanded. We don't know, one executive admitted. Our translator isn't answering. The caller became louder, more irritated. One executive nervously checked his watch. Another loosened his tie. Dominic's jaw tightened. The deal was slipping away in real time. Edith froze beside the table. The voice coming through the phone sounded strangely familiar. Not because she knew the man, because she knew the language. More specifically, she knew the dialect. It wasn't standard Italian. It was an old regional dialect rarely spoken outside a handful of communities in Sicily. Edith had heard it her entire childhood. Her grandmother spoke it every day. The caller wasn't negotiating. He wasn't asking for more money. He wasn't changing terms. He was offended. Deeply offended. Edith knew she should stay silent. She was a waitress. These were billionaires, lawyers, and executives. None of this involved her. Then the caller shouted something that made her heart sink. He was about to end the conversation. The deal was seconds from collapsing. Edith took a breath. He's not asking for more money, she said quietly. The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. Dominic slowly lifted his eyes from the phone and looked directly at her for the first time. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Excuse me, he asked. Edith swallowed. She knew she was crossing a line that could cost her job, but it was too late to stop now. She looked at the billionaire and said the sentence that would change both of their lives forever. Sir, I think you're about to lose the deal because nobody in this room understands what he's really saying. The room became so quiet that Edith could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every executive at the table stared at her. Dominic Caldwell's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. For the first time all evening, he wasn't looking through her. He was looking at her. What did you just say? He asked. Edith immediately questioned her decision. She should have stayed silent. She should have poured the water and walked away. That was what waitresses were supposed to do. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a billion-dollar negotiation. The caller isn't asking for more money, she repeated carefully. He's upset because he thinks he's being disrespected. One of the lawyers laughed. And how exactly would you know that? Edith ignored him. Her attention remained on the voice still coming through the speaker. The man continued speaking rapidly in the Sicilian dialect. Dominic noticed something interesting. Edith wasn't merely recognizing words. She was listening, really listening, as if she understood every nuance, every pause, every emotional shift. Translate, Dominic said. The command surprised everyone, including Edith. Sir, you clearly understand him. Translate. Edith hesitated. The executives looked horrified. One of them leaned toward Dominic. This is ridiculous. Dominic never looked away from Edith. Translate. The voice on the phone grew louder. Angry. Impatient. Edith took a slow breath. Then she spoke. He's saying the contract isn't the problem. The room remained silent. He's saying nobody from your side has shown him enough respect to deserve the contract. Dominic's chief advisor frowned. That doesn't make any sense. Edith shook her head. It does if you understand the culture. She pointed toward the phone. He's from an older generation. In his mind, business isn't only about numbers. It's about trust. He thinks you're hiding behind lawyers because you don't have the authority to speak for yourself. Dominic leaned back slightly. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on his face. Continue. Edith listened again. The caller said something longer this time. She translated immediately. He's saying his father would never have negotiated this way. Another sentence followed. And now he's asking why a billionaire is afraid to speak directly to him. One of the executives looked shocked. That's exactly what's happening. Dominic slowly stood up. The movement immediately silenced everyone. He walked around the table until he was standing beside Edith. Can you answer him? Edith looked at him. You want me to? Can you? She nodded once. Dominic picked up the phone and handed it to her. The gesture stunned the room. A billionaire worth billions had just entrusted the most important conversation of his year to a waitress. Edith carefully took the phone. Her heart hammered inside her chest. Then she spoke. The dialect flowed naturally, smoothly, effortlessly. The angry voice on the other end immediately stopped talking. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the caller responded. His tone was completely different. Calmer, curious, almost friendly. Edith continued. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When she finally handed the phone back to Dominic, the room was frozen in disbelief. What happened? Dominic asked. Edith looked at him. He's willing to continue the negotiation. The chief advisor blinked. That's it. Edith shook her head. No. She hesitated. He also wants to know who I am. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Dominic stared at her. Why? Edith gave a small smile. Because he said nobody under the age of 70 speaks that dialect anymore. Before anyone could respond, the phone buzzed again. A text message appeared on the screen. Dominic opened it. His eyes narrowed. What? One executive asked. Dominic slowly looked up at Edith. For the first time all evening, there was no arrogance in his expression. Only curiosity. He wants her at tomorrow's meeting in Rome. The room exploded with protests. Absolutely not. She's a waitress. This is insane. We can't take a civilian into a negotiation like this. Dominic ignored every objection. His gaze remained fixed on Edith. Meanwhile, Edith felt her stomach drop. Rome? She had expected to finish her shift and take the subway home. Instead, a billionaire she had met less than 10 minutes ago was looking at her as if she had just become the most important person in the room. Then Dominic asked a question that made her even more nervous. Miss Stevens. He paused. Who exactly are you? For the second time that evening, Edith Stevens found herself standing in complete silence while an entire room waited for her answer. Dominic Caldwell's question seemed simple enough. Who exactly are you? Yet Edith knew there was no simple answer. Not anymore. She glanced around the table. Every executive was staring at her. Some looked suspicious. Others looked annoyed. A few seemed genuinely curious. To them, she was a waitress who had somehow inserted herself into a billion-dollar negotiation. To Dominic, she had become a mystery. Edith slowly placed the phone back onto the table. I'm exactly who I said I am, she replied. A waitress. Several executives laughed. Dominic didn't. No, he said calmly. A waitress doesn't casually speak one of the rarest dialects in Europe. Edith folded her arms. My grandmother taught me. And your grandmother taught you negotiation strategy too? Dominic asked. The room fell quiet again. Edith immediately realized she had revealed more than she intended. She wasn't just translating words. She had interpreted intent. She had understood cultural signals that professional translators had missed entirely. Dominic noticed her hesitation. "Sit down," he said. Edith blinked. "What? Sit." One executive nearly choked on his water. "Dominic, she's staff." Dominic never looked away from Edith. "Not tonight." Reluctantly, she sat at the far end of the table. It felt wrong. She had spent years serving people in rooms like this. Now she was sitting among them. Dominic remained standing. "Tell me what happened on that call." Edith took a breath. "The caller wasn't angry about the contract." "You said that already." "Because the contract wasn't the issue." She pointed toward the phone. "The issue was trust." Several executives exchanged confused looks. Edith continued. "Everyone here approached the conversation like a business transaction. He approached it like a relationship." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Thoughtfully." "Explain." "In his world, respect comes before numbers. He believes powerful people should speak directly. Every time someone else answered for you, he became more convinced you weren't taking him seriously." One of the lawyers scoffed. "That's ridiculous." Edith looked directly at him. "And yet he almost walked away from a $3 billion deal because of it." The lawyer immediately fell silent. Dominic slowly smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man discovering something valuable. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Edith looked down at her hands. "College." "You studied linguistics?" Dominic asked. She nodded. "Columbia University." Several heads turned. Even Dominic seemed surprised. Columbia wasn't a place people casually attended. "Graduated?" he asked. Edith shook her head. "No." "Why not?" The question hit harder than she expected. For a moment, she considered refusing to answer. Then she remembered that every person in the room already viewed her as an outsider. There was nothing left to protect. "My father died." The room became quiet. "My mother got sick a year later. Then my sister started college. Somebody had to work." No one spoke. Dominic studied her carefully. "So you left?" "I didn't have a choice." Dominic nodded slowly. For the first time, the conversation felt less like an interrogation and more like understanding. Before he could speak again, his phone vibrated. Another message from Italy. Dominic opened it. His expression immediately changed. "What?" one executive asked nervously. Dominic handed the phone across the table. The message was brief. 3 sentences. Yet it completely changed the atmosphere in the room. The Italian businessman wasn't merely requesting Edith's presence anymore. He was insisting on it. The message ended with a warning. "If the young woman from the phone call does not attend tomorrow's meeting, there will be no meeting." One executive slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd." Another shook his head. "We can't restructure an international negotiation around a waitress." Dominic ignored them all. His attention remained on Edith. He walked slowly around the table until he stood directly across from her. "How soon can you be ready to leave?" Edith stared at him. "Leave? My plane departs in 4 hours." Her stomach dropped. "For Rome." "For Rome." Edith laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." Dominic's expression never changed. "Miss Stevens, $3 billion is currently, depending on your answer." Edith looked around the room. The executives looked horrified. Dominic looked completely serious. And for the first time that evening, Edith realized something terrifying. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an opportunity. The kind of opportunity that could change her life forever. The only question was whether accepting it would be the biggest mistake she ever made. Opportunity rarely arrives at a convenient time. More often, it appears when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely unprepared. Edith Stevens spent the next hour trying to convince herself to say no. After leaving the conference room, she returned to the employee locker area and sat alone on a metal bench staring at her phone. Rome. Private jets. Billion-dollar negotiations. None of it belonged in her life. Her life consisted of double shifts, overdue bills, and careful budgeting. Her life consisted of stretching every dollar as far as possible. People like Dominic Caldwell existed on magazine covers, not in her reality. Yet every time she thought about refusing, another thought appeared. Sarah. Her younger sister was only months away from being forced out of college if tuition wasn't paid. Edith had been hiding the truth from her for weeks. Every phone call became another excuse. Another promise that everything would somehow work out. But Edith knew the numbers. The money wasn't there. It hadn't been there for months. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah appeared on the screen. "Hey, just checking in. Love you." Edith closed her eyes. The timing felt almost cruel. 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up outside the restaurant. Dominic Caldwell was waiting inside. Edith hesitated before opening the door. The billionaire looked as composed as ever. His jacket was perfectly pressed. His expression revealed nothing. "Have you decided?" he asked. Edith sat down. "I haven't even agreed to consider it." Dominic nodded. "Fair enough." The car began moving through Manhattan traffic. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Edith broke the silence. "Why me?" Dominic looked out the window. "Because the deal depends on you." "That's not what I mean." He turned toward her. "Then what do you mean?" Edith folded her arms. "You have translators, consultants, advisors, experts. Why are you asking a waitress to help negotiate a $3 billion merger?" Dominic's answer came immediately. "Because none of them succeeded." Edith stared at him. "And I did." "You did in 2 minutes what my team couldn't do in 6 months. The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. Dominic wasn't flattering her. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He was stating a fact. "How much are you paying these experts?" Edith asked. A faint smile appeared. "More than they deserve at the moment." Despite herself, Edith laughed. Dominic reached into a leather portfolio and removed a document. "Before you make your decision, you should see this." Edith accepted the folder. Her eyes widened almost immediately. It wasn't a contract. It was information about her. Tuition balances, medical expenses, mortgage records from her mother's care facility. Her stomach tightened. "You investigated me. I needed to know who I was hiring." Edith looked up sharply. "Hiring?" Dominic nodded. "Temporary consultant." She nearly laughed. "Consultant? 3 days. Doing what?" "Helping me understand people." Edith stared at him. "That's your job description?" Dominic shrugged. "It's surprisingly valuable." He reached into his jacket and slid another paper across the seat. Edith looked down. Her breath caught. It was a compensation agreement. 3 days. $50,000. Her mind immediately assumed she had misread it. She checked again. The number hadn't changed. $50,000. For 3 days. "This isn't real." "It is." Edith looked at him. "Nobody pays that much." "Some people do." Her hands trembled slightly. $50,000 would solve nearly every immediate problem in her life. Sarah could stay in school. Her mother's facility would be paid. The pressure crushing her for years would finally ease. Dominic watched her carefully. "Money isn't the reason I'm offering this." Edith looked up. "Then why are you offering it?" Dominic's expression became serious. "Because I think you've spent years being underestimated." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Dominic leaned forward. "The plane leaves at midnight." Edith looked out the window. Manhattan lights blurred across the glass. Part of her wanted to run. Another part wanted to believe this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for her entire life. Finally, she turned back toward him. "What happens if I say yes?" Dominic smiled slightly. "Tomorrow morning you wake up in Rome." Edith swallowed. "And what happens if I say no?" Dominic looked at her for several seconds before answering. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you hadn't." The car grew silent again. Outside, the city continued moving. Inside, Edith Stevens found herself standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. And deep down, she already knew which answer she was going to give. The difference between opportunity and danger is often impossible to see until you're already committed. At 11:45 that night, Edith Stevens stood inside a private aviation terminal on the edge of JFK Airport, wondering if she had completely lost her mind. The building looked more like a luxury hotel than an airport. Polished marble floors reflected soft lighting. Leather chairs lined the waiting lounge. Staff members moved quietly through the terminal carrying tablets instead of luggage carts. Everything felt expensive. Everything felt unreal. Edith still couldn't believe she had said yes. Earlier that evening she had gone home, packed a small suitcase, called her sister, and somehow avoided mentioning that she was about to board a billionaire's private jet to Rome. Sarah would never have believed her anyway. Across the lounge, Dominic Caldwell stood with several members of his executive team reviewing documents. He looked completely at home in this environment. Calm, focused, unshakable. The kind of man who expected the world to move according to his schedule. Every few minutes someone approached him with a question. Every few minutes he made a decision worth more money than Edith had earned in her entire life. Yet despite everything happening around him, he seemed unusually alert, almost suspicious. Edith noticed it immediately. Dominic wasn't acting like a man preparing for an important business trip. He was acting like a man expecting trouble. A few minutes later, boarding began. Edith followed the group onto the aircraft. The private jet was enormous, larger than any plane she had ever imagined. Cream leather seats filled the cabin. Conference tables occupied the center section. A private office stood near the rear. Everything smelled new and expensive. She took a seat near the window. Dominic sat across from her. Gavin Mercer, Dominic's longtime executive advisor, sat nearby reviewing financial documents. Edith recognized him from the restaurant. He was the executive who had laughed when she first spoke up. He still looked unhappy about her presence. "I still don't understand this decision," Gavin said as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Dominic didn't look up from his tablet. "That's unfortunate." Gavin frowned. "She's not qualified." Edith pretended not to hear. "Neither was I when I started," Dominic replied calmly. "That isn't the point." "Then what is?" Gavin hesitated. "This deal is too important." Dominic finally looked up. "Exactly." The conversation ended there. But Edith noticed something strange. Gavin immediately looked away. For a brief second, she had seen fear. Not irritation. Not arrogance. Fear. The realization lingered in her mind long after the jet climbed above the Atlantic. Hours passed. Most passengers eventually slept. Edith couldn't. She sat near the conference area reviewing background information about the Italian company. Shipping routes, revenue forecasts, ownership structures, family relationships. The deeper she read, the more complicated everything became. Then she noticed something unusual. A series of internal reports contained conflicting information. Small discrepancies. Tiny details most people would ignore. Numbers that didn't quite align. Ownership percentages that shifted between documents. She frowned. Maybe it was nothing. Yet the inconsistencies bothered her. Around 3 in the morning, she walked toward the galley for coffee. As she rounded a corner, she heard voices. She stopped immediately. One voice belonged to Gavin. The other belonged to someone she didn't recognize. Edith wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the tension in Gavin's voice caught her attention. "Everything is under control," Gavin whispered. Silence. Then another voice responded through a phone speaker. "It better be." Edith froze. Gavin continued. "He still doesn't suspect anything." Another pause. "And the girl?" The question made Edith's stomach tighten. Gavin lowered his voice further. "She wasn't part of the plan." Edith felt her pulse accelerate. "Plan? What plan?" The conversation continued, but she couldn't hear every word. Then one sentence reached her clearly. "If she becomes a problem, deal with it before Rome." Edith stepped backward. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. She accidentally brushed against a service cart. The wheels squeaked. The voices stopped instantly. Silence. Complete silence. Edith didn't wait. She turned and walked quickly back toward the passenger cabin. Seconds later, she heard footsteps behind her. Gavin emerged from the hallway. His expression looked perfectly normal. Too normal. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked pleasantly. Edith forced herself to smile. "Jet lag." Gavin nodded. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." He walked away. But Edith couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed. She returned to her seat and looked across the cabin at Dominic Caldwell. The billionaire was asleep, unaware, vulnerable for perhaps the first time since she'd met him. Edith stared out the window into the darkness above the Atlantic Ocean. Hours earlier, she thought she was flying to Rome to help save a business deal. Now she wasn't so sure, because somewhere on that aircraft, someone was lying. And for the first time since accepting Dominic's offer, Edith began to wonder whether the greatest threat to the merger wasn't waiting in Italy at all. It might already be on the plane. Trust is easy when nothing is at risk. The real test comes when the truth could destroy everything. Edith Stevens spent the next hour pretending to sleep. Her eyes remained closed, but her mind refused to rest. Every word she had overheard replayed endlessly in her head. "If she becomes a problem, deal with it before Rome." The sentence felt too specific to misunderstand. Gavin Mercer had been talking about her. More importantly, he had been talking to someone in secret. Someone he clearly didn't want Dominic Caldwell to know about. Edith considered waking Dominic immediately. It would have been the safest option. Yet something stopped her. She barely knew Dominic. What if she was wrong? What if she had misunderstood the conversation? Accusing a senior executive without proof could destroy her credibility before they even landed. No, she needed evidence. The problem was that she had no idea how to get it. Around 4 in the morning, most of the aircraft remained quiet. The cabin lights were dimmed. Only a few reading lamps illuminated scattered seats. Dominic had moved into the private office at the rear of the plane to review documents. Gavin appeared to be asleep near the conference table. Edith carefully unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the galley. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for. She only knew something felt wrong. As she passed the conference area, she noticed a tablet lying unattended beside Gavin's briefcase. The screen was dark. Normally, she would have ignored it. But then a notification briefly flashed across the display. A message preview. Just a few words. Rome must not happen. Edith stopped walking. The message disappeared almost immediately. Her pulse accelerated. Rome must not happen. This wasn't about her anymore. Someone wanted the entire deal to fail. Before she could think further, a voice spoke behind her. Can't sleep? Edith nearly jumped. Dominic stood in the hallway holding a cup of coffee. His expression immediately changed when he saw her face. What's wrong? For a moment, Edith considered lying. Then she remembered the conversation, the message, the fear in Gavin's eyes. I think someone is trying to sabotage the merger. Dominic stared at her. Most people would have laughed. Most people would have demanded proof. Dominic simply asked one question. Why? Edith told him everything. The overheard phone call. The strange comments. The message on the tablet. She expected skepticism. Instead, Dominic listened carefully. When she finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded. I was afraid of that. Edith blinked. You already suspected something? Dominic leaned against the wall. For months. Her eyes widened. Then why bring Gavin? Dominic looked toward the darkened cabin. Because suspicion isn't evidence. Edith suddenly understood. Dominic hadn't ignored the possibility of betrayal. He simply hadn't been able to prove it. Do you think it's him? She asked. Dominic sighed. I don't know. That answer surprised her. You don't? No. He looked genuinely disappointed. Gavin has worked with me for 9 years. The statement carried weight. This wasn't merely business. It was personal. Then what do we do? Edith asked. Dominic took a slow sip of coffee. We find out who he's talking to. The opportunity arrived sooner than either expected. Less than an hour later, Gavin left his seat and disappeared toward the communications section of the aircraft. Dominic immediately looked at Edith. Now, they moved quietly through the cabin. Gavin's briefcase remained beside his chair. Unlocked. Dominic opened it. Inside were contracts, reports, and travel documents. Everything appeared normal. Then Edith noticed a second phone hidden beneath a folder. There. Dominic picked it up. The device wasn't company issued. It wasn't registered under any Caldwell Industries account. It was completely separate. Dominic's expression hardened. Interesting. He opened the message history. The first few texts looked harmless. Then he reached a thread with no contact name attached. The messages grew darker. Delay the signing. Keep Caldwell distracted. Final payment upon cancellation. Edith felt a chill run through her body. Dominic read silently. His jaw tightened with every message. Finally, he stopped. One message had been sent only hours earlier. The sender's identity wasn't listed, but the content was enough. The instruction was simple. Ensure the consultant never reaches the meeting. Dominic slowly lowered the phone. The cabin suddenly felt colder. Edith stared at him. Who sent it? Dominic looked at the screen one final time. Then he looked directly at her. His expression was unlike anything she had seen before. Not anger. Not fear. Betrayal. I know exactly who he's working for. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone you trusted. The private jet touched down in Rome shortly after sunrise. Through the aircraft windows, Edith Stevens watched the Italian countryside emerge beneath a blanket of golden morning light. Ordinarily, the view would have been breathtaking. Today, she barely noticed it. Her attention remained fixed on the message Dominic had discovered on Gavin's hidden phone. Ensure the consultant never reaches the meeting. Even now, hours later, the words sent a chill through her. Across the cabin, Gavin Mercer appeared completely relaxed. He chatted with other executives. He reviewed documents. He smiled politely whenever someone spoke to him. If Edith hadn't seen the messages herself, she never would have suspected him. That was the frightening part. He looked normal, trustworthy, familiar. Dominic remained calm as well. Too calm. As the passengers prepared to disembark, Edith moved closer to him. What happens now? She asked quietly. Dominic adjusted his jacket. Now we pretend we know nothing. Edith frowned. That's your plan. It's the only plan. He glanced toward Gavin. The moment he realizes we're aware of his betrayal, he'll change tactics. And if he's already planning something? Dominic's expression hardened. Then we'll find out what it is. A convoy of black vehicles waited outside the airport. Security teams escorted the group through a private exit and toward the city. Rome unfolded around them in a blur of ancient architecture and modern traffic. Edith sat beside Dominic in the rear vehicle while Gavin rode several cars ahead. Who is he working for? She finally asked. Dominic looked. Out the window. A company called Vesper Global. Edith recognized the name immediately. Vesper Global was Caldwell Industries' largest competitor. They had been trying to acquire the same shipping network for nearly a year. You think they're paying him? Dominic nodded. The messages confirm it. Edith felt sick. For how long? Dominic's answer came quietly. Long enough to know things he should never have shared. The realization made her stomach tighten. Gavin hadn't merely been leaking information. He had been helping another company sabotage Dominic's business from the inside. By the time the convoy reached the hotel, Edith understood something important. The merger wasn't the only thing at risk anymore. Dominic's entire reputation was on the line. That afternoon, the first negotiation session began inside a private conference suite overlooking Rome. Representatives from the Italian shipping company filled one side of the room. Dominic's team occupied the other. Edith sat beside him as an official cultural consultant. The title still felt strange. Across the table sat Alessandro Moretti, the company chairman. Unlike the angry voice from the phone, Alessandro appeared calm, intelligent, and surprisingly warm. The discussions began smoothly. Financial projections were reviewed. Legal structures were examined. Future expansion plans were discussed. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. Edith noticed Gavin growing increasingly uncomfortable. Every time the conversation moved closer to final approval, he found a reason to interrupt. A missing document. An unanswered question. A procedural concern. Small delays. Constant delays. At first nobody seemed to notice. Then Edith began keeping count. 7 interruptions in 90 minutes. Every one of them pushed the agreement further away from completion. During a short break, she leaned toward Dominic. He's stalling. Dominic nodded. I know. Then why aren't you stopping him? Dominic's eyes remained on Gavin. Because he's nervous. Edith followed his gaze. For the first time, she saw it too. Gavin wasn't acting like a man in control. He was acting like a man running out of time. When the meeting resumed, Dominic made a sudden announcement. I'd like to move directly to final terms. The room immediately quieted. Gavin nearly dropped his pen. Today, he asked. Dominic looked at him. Why not? Gavin forced a laugh. We still have several issues to review. Alessandro Moretti shook his head. Actually, we do not. He smiled. From our perspective, everything is ready. Edith watched panic flash across Gavin's face. Just for a second. But it was enough. He immediately stood. Excuse me, he said. I need to make a call. Dominic nodded. Of course. Gavin hurried from the room. The door closed behind him. Dominic stood immediately. Edith. She looked up. What? His voice dropped to a whisper. Follow him. Her heart skipped a beat. What? He won't make his move inside this room. Dominic's eyes hardened. But he's about to make one somewhere else. Edith stared at him. The betrayal. The hidden messages. The delays. Everything had been leading towards something. And for the first time, she realized they were running out of time. Because whatever Gavin was planning, it was happening now. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to arrive at the right moment. Edith Stevens stepped into the hallway just seconds after Gavin Mercer disappeared around the corner. Her heart pounded as she moved through the luxury hotel, trying to remain unnoticed. Guests passed by carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Staff members hurried between meeting rooms. Nobody paid attention to her. That was an advantage. Most people still underestimated her. Most people still saw a former waitress instead of a threat. Gavin entered a private business lounge at the end of the corridor. Edith slowed her pace and stopped near an open terrace overlooking Rome. From there she could hear voices without being seen. Gavin sounded different now. The polished executive persona was gone. His voice carried urgency. Panic. They're moving faster than expected, he whispered. A pause followed. Then another voice answered through a phone speaker. Edith couldn't hear every word, but she heard enough. Then stop the signing. Gavin lowered his voice further. I'm trying. More silence. Then one sentence drifted clearly through the open doorway. If Caldwell signs today, we lose everything. Edith felt her pulse quicken. She carefully moved closer. Gavin continued speaking. The consultant is the problem. Another pause. She changed the entire negotiation. Edith's stomach tightened. She wasn't imagining things anymore. The conspiracy was real. Gavin wasn't merely delaying paperwork. He was actively trying to destroy the merger. Then she heard the final piece. The piece that changed everything. The forged risk report is ready, Gavin said. Once it's delivered, the board will never approve the acquisition. Edith froze. Forged report. The words echoed in her mind. Suddenly, all the delays made sense. Gavin wasn't trying to postpone the signing. He was preparing false evidence to make the merger appear dangerous. If the report reached the decision-makers, months of work could collapse in minutes. A chair scraped against the floor inside the lounge. Edith immediately stepped back and moved away from the doorway. Seconds later, Gavin emerged, still holding his phone. He walked quickly toward the elevators without noticing her. Edith waited until he disappeared before pulling out her own phone. Her hands trembled slightly. She immediately called Dominic. He answered on the first ring. Tell me you found something. I did. She quickly explained everything. The phone grew silent. Finally, Dominic spoke. Get back to the conference room. What are you going to do? End this. 20 minutes later, everyone was back inside the negotiation suite. The atmosphere felt optimistic. Alessandro Moretti and his team were preparing final approval documents. Lawyers organized paperwork. Advisors reviewed signatures. Everything was moving toward completion. Gavin entered moments later carrying a sealed folder. He looked confident again. Too confident. Edith immediately recognized it. The forged report. Dominic watched him carefully, but said nothing. Gavin approached the table. Before we proceed, he announced, there's new information the board should review. Several executives looked surprised. Alessandro frowned. New information? Gavin nodded. Material risk. Factors that could significantly impact valuation. He placed the folder on the table. Exactly as planned. Exactly as expected. Gavin opened the report and began speaking. Recent findings suggest substantial operational vulnerabilities within the shipping network. Edith could see board members growing concerned. Some began reviewing the documents. Others exchanged nervous looks. The room was starting to shift, just as Gavin intended. Then Dominic stood. Interesting. Gavin paused. Excuse me. Dominic smiled slightly. I said that's interesting. The room grew quiet. Dominic slowly walked toward the center of the table. Because according to your phone records, this report was prepared before any of these so-called findings existed. The color drained from Gavin's face. Complete silence followed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Dominic placed a second folder onto the table. Would you like me to continue? Gavin stared at him. For the first time since Edith met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Dominic opened the folder. Inside were copies of messages, financial transfers, communication logs, and evidence gathered from the hidden phone. Board members immediately leaned forward. Alessandro Moretti's expression darkened. One executive removed his glasses and stared at the pages in disbelief. Dominic's voice remained calm. For months, someone inside my organization has been providing confidential information to Vesper Global. He looked directly at Gavin. Today we discovered who. The room exploded with questions. Gavin attempted to respond. This is a misunderstanding. Nobody believed him. Not anymore. Edith watched as years of credibility collapsed in minutes. Every lie, every delay, every act of sabotage was suddenly visible. Finally, Alessandro Moretti raised a hand for silence. He looked at Gavin with disappointment. Then he turned toward Dominic. I believe our decision is clear. He picked up the final agreement. One by one, signatures were added. The merger was approved. $3 billion. Months of negotiations. A future secured. And as the final document was signed, the room erupted into applause. Gavin sat frozen in his chair. Defeated. Finished. But, as everyone celebrated, Alessandro Moretti did something unexpected. He stood, raised his glass, and looked directly at Edith Stevens. Before we celebrate, he said, I believe the room should recognize the person who made this possible. Every eye turned toward her. And for the second time in her life, Edith found herself standing at the center of a room she never expected to enter. The most meaningful victories are rarely measured in dollars. They are measured in the people who finally see your worth. Applause filled the conference room overlooking Rome. Executives stood. Lawyers smiled. Investors shook hands. Months of negotiations had finally reached a successful conclusion. The merger was complete. $3 billion. One signature after another had transformed years of planning into reality. Yet despite everything that had happened, Edith Stevens felt strangely disconnected from the celebration. She wasn't thinking about money. She wasn't thinking about corporate victories. She was thinking about the restaurant in Manhattan, the double shifts, the overdue tuition payments, the countless nights she had spent wondering whether she was falling behind faster than she could recover. Just a few weeks earlier, nobody in this room knew her name. Now hundreds of millions of dollars had changed hands because she chose to speak up. Alessandro Moretti lifted his glass. To Edith Stevens. The room echoed the toast. Edith immediately felt embarrassed. Please don't, she said softly. Alessandro laughed. In Italy, refusing recognition is considered suspicious. The room laughed with him. Then Alessandro's expression became serious. You reminded everyone here of something important. He glanced around the room. Business is not built on contracts. It is built on trust. Several executives nodded. Dominic Caldwell remained silent, watching her carefully. He knew Edith was uncomfortable with attention. He also knew she deserved every second of it. After the meeting ended, celebrations continued throughout the evening. A private dinner was organized overlooking the city. Industry leaders attended. Investors arrived from across Europe. Journalists requested interviews. Yet somehow Edith found herself standing alone on a terrace beneath the Roman night sky. The city stretched endlessly before her. Ancient buildings glowed beneath soft lights. Church bells echoed in the distance. For the first time in days, everything felt quiet. There you are. Dominic stepped onto the terrace carrying 2 cups of coffee. Edith smiled. I was hiding. Terrible hiding place. He handed her one of the cups. For several moments they stood silently overlooking the city. Finally Dominic spoke. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were interrupting my dinner. Edith laughed. I remember. Then I thought you were helping me save a deal. He paused. Turns out I was wrong both times. Edith looked at him. About what? Dominic smiled. You weren't helping me save a deal. She raised an eyebrow. No. He shook his head. You were helping me see things I stopped noticing years ago. Edith didn't know how to respond. Dominic looked out over the city lights. When you're successful long enough, people stop telling you the truth. His voice grew quieter. They tell you what you want to hear. Edith listened carefully. You told me what I needed to hear. For a moment neither spoke. Then Dominic reached into his jacket and handed her a sealed envelope. Edith frowned. What's this? Open it. She carefully unfolded the documents inside. Her eyes widened almost immediately, then widened again. She looked up in disbelief. Dominic. He smiled. Keep reading. The documents included a full scholarship fund for Sarah's remaining university education. Every semester. Every expense. Fully paid. Edith's hands trembled. You can't do this. I already did. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Dominic continued. There's more. She looked at the next page. A healthcare trust for her mother's assisted living expenses. Long-term coverage. Fully funded. Edith stared silently at the paperwork. For years she had carried those responsibilities alone. Every decision. Every bill. Every sacrifice. Suddenly the weight felt lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. Why? She whispered. Dominic's answer came without hesitation. Because opportunities should change lives. Edith looked away, trying unsuccessfully to stop the tears. Dominic gave her a moment before speaking again. There's one final page. She opened it slowly. The document carried the official letterhead of Caldwell Industries, Director of International Cultural Strategy, a permanent executive position. Edith laughed through her tears. That title sounds completely made up. Dominic laughed too. Maybe it is. Then his expression became serious. But the offer isn't. Edith stared at the letter. Weeks ago, she had been serving water in a restaurant. Now she was being offered a career she never imagined possible. The terrace fell quiet again. Finally, Dominic lifted his coffee cup. Can I tell you a secret? Edith nodded. Dominic smiled. The smartest person in Rome today wasn't a billionaire. Edith laughed softly. Don't let your shareholders hear that. Too late. He raised the cup slightly higher. To Edith Stevens. This time she raised her cup too. Below them, Rome continued glowing beneath the night sky. Thousands of people walked its streets carrying dreams, worries, talents, and stories nobody else could see. And somewhere among them were countless people just like Edith had once been. Overlooked, underestimated, invisible. People waiting for someone to recognize what they already possessed. Because the truth had never been about language, money, or billion-dollar mergers. The truth was simpler than that. Potential does not disappear when life becomes difficult. Talent does not vanish because circumstances change. And sometimes the person serving your dinner today may be the very person capable of changing your future tomorrow. All it takes is someone willing to listen.